Here's 10 things I wish I knew earlier about training legs. These tips wouldn't have just helped me build muscle and get stronger, but do it in less time, more effectively, whilst improving my ability and overall athleticism. And they would have really helped me fall in love with the process a lot sooner, as opposed to feeling like I was just forcing myself to do the work because I had to, and not because it was something that I truly enjoyed. So first up is to lean back on the leg extension. This is one of those things where science is starting to catch up to the bro science from decades ago. Leg extensions are one of the few ways for us to train one of the muscles of the thigh called the rectus femoris. Laying back, as opposed to sitting upright, places it into a slightly more stretched out or longer position, which, based on a few nerdy muscle physiology principles like stretch medial hypertrophy and the length-tension relationship, seems to be a slightly stronger and more effective position to be training a muscle from. So give it a shot. I usually find that most people end up being around 20 to 30% stronger on this once they get used to it, which means you can expose your body to more tension and stimulate more gains. You don't have to lay all the way back till you're completely horizontal. The goal is to open up your hip angle to find your own comfortable position. So you still want your butt to be in contact with the seat so you don't lose stability. The second tip is to use a variety of load carrying options for single leg exercises like lunges, split squats, and step-ups. People think single leg exercises are designed for two things: ironing out side-to-side imbalances and to improve total overall balance. Now, strength discrepancies between sides may improve some, but will always have a strong side and a weak side. As for balance, that is more a side effect of the exercise and not necessarily the goal. If you really want to work on your balance, you'd be doing balancing drills like standing on one leg. The real reason why we do single leg movements is to access different amounts of rotation occurring at the hips. When I hold the weight on the non-working side only, or what's called contralateral loading, this pulls my body and pelvis towards the working leg, which increases the challenge on hip mobility over time. Ipsilateral loading is holding the weight on the working side only and has the opposite rotational force, which makes it slightly easier to push out from the bottom position. And if you hold the weight on both sides, you don't get any of that, but you do get nice stability that can help you overload the muscle. Neither is better or worse. I'd simply be looking at asking yourself, what have you been neglecting, and does it show up in things like poor hip mobility or the ability to rotate your legs? Third thing is to lean forwards while doing seated leg curls. I love seated leg curls. They're probably the most bang for your buck direct hamstring exercise for building end range strength and muscle without putting any load through your spine and creating extra fatigue like you would through a typical hinge variation like good mornings or Romanian deadlifts. They also give you a lot of stability, so all you have to focus on is pushing as hard as you can without worrying about much else. Here's something that seems obvious, but most people don't realize right away. When you're at the start of a seated leg curl, you're in the exact same position as the bottom of a Romanian deadlift. So what does this mean? It means just like the RDL, we're in a really good position here to be stretching the hamstring and getting it loaded up in that position. So when I cue an RDL, I normally think about making my chest as proud as possible to tip my pelvis forwards to increase the stretch on the back of my legs. And the same thing can be done on the seated leg curl to get that extra stretch as well. Check out how pro natural bodybuilder and black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Jimmy House, sets up this exercise.
So here from this position, I'm gonna be leaning forward as if I was trying to touch my toes. Pull your chest up and straighten out your entire spine here. Flex the quad, squeeze through that, hold, control on the way back, load the eccentric, flex the quad again, you should feel that stretch, and squeeze. And that's one of the best ways you can use a simple machine that you can find at any commercial gym to help mobilize your hamstrings.
Next up, we have using straps for front squats. The load placement on front squats allows you to more easily get into a full depth squat. So even if you have horrible mobility and proportions, most people will find it easier to get into a front squat than a back squat. The only issue is it's limited by how effectively you can hold the weight up in front of your body. If you don't have the mobility for a clean grip, most people opt for the cross-arm variation, which is perfectly valid, but it's also quite challenging when you get tired. Another option is to use straps to work around your wrist and shoulder mobility. You simply attach them to the bar where your hands would normally go, pull them tight, and use them to keep the bar fixed in place. You're able to focus on the same cues as you would with the clean grip to tension your lats and upper back without worrying about the bar rolling forwards down your arms. Another great option for anterior load and helps you stay more upright while squatting is the Zercher carry position, although that definitely takes a lot of getting used to. Tip number 5 is training calves first. I think many people get stuck into the same pattern of training a big compound lifts first. It's always squats first. But there are also going to be a lot of benefits to training other areas like your calves or hamstrings first. First and foremost is from a basic priority standpoint. Whatever you do first, you're able to give the most attention and mental energy towards, which is why you'd pick the hardest compound exercises to go first usually. But that often leaves the same exercises and body parts to be tacked on to the end of a workout, and they wind up becoming more and more neglected and weaker long term. Calves and hamstrings are the biggest two ones that get overlooked here. John Meadows was a big fan of doing leg curls before squats as a way to warm up the hips, and I think that's really great. I like to extend it down to the calves as well. No matter how hard you go, you're not going to completely wipe yourself out to the point of decreasing performance on the big stuff like your squats and deadlifts. But if anything, you're probably going to improve your mobility and stability, and you're going to finally start training an area that has been neglected for so long. Number 6 is, while we're talking about mobility and specifically the ankles, elevating your heels when you squat is not cheating. People often say it's a band-aid or crutch for poor mobility and is just masking a problem without addressing it. Well, for many people, this problem isn't poor mobility, it's literally their bone structure, where you can have two people of similar heights but incredibly different relative leg lengths and torso lengths. All else being equal, people with longer torsos and shorter femurs will have a more upright squat and easier time getting into a deep knee bend squat than people with shorter torsos and longer femurs. Elevating the heels in this case would be giving those longer femored people a relatively shorter femur, which helps to balance things out a little bit more. Now, if that's cheating, then I, as someone who has genetically good leg and torso lengths for squatting, I'm permanently playing the game in God mode. Elevating your heels on a wedge or using squat shoes or even just a couple of small plates can make your squats feel so much better, which means you can train even harder and get more out of your leg days, which sounds pretty good to me. This next one isn't one that I do a lot anymore, but it definitely serves a purpose. It can be an absolute game changer for a lot of people. So have you ever lifted up a weight that you've done before, so you know you can do it, but on this specific day it just felt really heavy and your performance sucked because of it? If so, this tip is for you. Doing explosive jumps at the start of your workout and even immediately before your work sets on exercises like squats or deadlifts may improve your overall performance. This trick relies on a theory known as post-activation potentiation, or in simple terms, the activation of all the muscles in a max effort jump carries over to your max lift and improves the activation there. We often think of muscle activation happening like an on-off switch. You either turn on your muscles and lift the weights or you don't. And that's kind of true, but not the complete picture. Muscle activation happens a little bit more like a dimmer switch. We've got these really big, strong, powerful muscle fibers that won't get activated until we absolutely need them. It takes a lot of energy and effort to use them, so your body prefers to turn that dimmer switch only maybe a quarter or half the way up and activate only the smaller, weaker muscle fibers if it can get away with it. Now that's fine, but if we flash back to you going to pick up a weight that you know you can do, but it feels a lot heavier than it should, that's usually because your body hasn't recruited all of its muscle fibers yet, which would probably mean it's going to be one tough set. Doing just a couple of max effort jumps is a really simple way to turn on all your muscle fibers and get them activated. That activation should then carry across to your main work sets. So we're not doing this to generate a ton of fatigue with super high reps, and if you need to, you can take maybe a short rest before you're doing your actual work set of whatever it is you're doing. But if you struggle with this sort of thing, it makes a pretty noticeable difference immediately. Tip number 8 is don't neglect your adductors. Your adductors are your inner thigh muscles that work to pull your legs from a wide stance into a narrow stance. They're also one of the prime hip extensor muscles that help you out of the bottom of a squat. We don't really think of doing much direct adductor work outside of the seated adduction machine, which I'm guessing for many of you is something you aren't really doing because it's a pretty fluffy accessory exercise overall. But given the size, strength, and role of the adductors, and the fact that we don't do much work that directly trains and biases them, this is a huge opportunity for us to make some pretty big wins by adding in just a small amount of work in. So doing some wider horse stance work like deadlifts and squats in these wider positions is a really simple way to start to access them a little bit more. They're also going to be working a little bit more when we have that rotational element from the earlier tip on the single leg exercises, so do that too. Adding in just a few exercises like seated adductions or Copenhagen planks and other variations are also great options. Next up is all about improving your mobility and range of motion. Just about everybody has tight hips. Doing stretching can absolutely help, but a big rock that many people are skipping over is adding in a deliberate 3-second pause in the bottom of exercise that emphasize the lengthened or stretched position for their muscles. So think of things like calf raises, which emphasizes dorsiflexion and the ankle joint, or a Romanian deadlift, which emphasizes hip flexion and the hamstrings, and a weighted pigeon or seated good morning for the hip abductors and glutes, and a split squat for hip extension and quads. It doesn't have to be complicated, just try to include at least one exercise per week for each muscle group that takes the muscle to its completely stretched out position under load, and prioritize it with an extra 3-second hold in that stretched position on every rep. I love it on calf raises in particular, as many people tend to bounce out of the bottom here because of how small that range of motion is and how relatively strong their Achilles tendons tend to be in the ankle. So this will build active strength and stability in all those hard to reach places, which will make you more mobile and resilient long term. Last tip, and probably the most important that I still see so many people arguing about, is that you don't have to do barbell squats when you train legs. Whether it's due to structure, mobility, or simply preference, many people don't want to do barbell squats, but feel like they have to because it's the king of exercises. Squats are an essential pattern to be training, as is lunging, but doing it as a specific movement of barbell squats is not. There are so many other free weight or machine-based options available for you to train your body to its limit. While I think most people should work on gaining proficiency in the barbell squat at some point, it's absolutely not an essential movement. Progressively overloading your body over time and being consistent is important. So do whatever allows you to do that and you'll get fantastic results. It sounds so simple and obvious now, but these tips took me years to not just learn, but to completely internalize and apply and reap the rewards from, and I hope they help you. A last bonus tip is to make sure you're following a structured program. So instead of second guessing yourself and wondering if you're doing enough or doing too much or doing things incorrectly or correctly, take the guesswork out of your training and follow my programs over on Ganbaru. They're all designed to be scalable and customizable to all goals and levels and give you direct access to me for coaching advice and technique reviews. Hit the link below to check it all out, and I'll see you on the next one.